Good afternoon and welcome to MedCity News Invest Precision Medicine. I'm Stephanie Baum, Director of Special Projects. Before we get started with our BioInnovation panel with Venture Cafe, I'd just like to give you some background on MedCity News. We were founded in 2008 to cover innovation in life sciences and healthcare. We have more than 425,000 unique visitors each month. We also cover biopharma, digital health, medical devices, diagnostics, as well as hospitals and payers in the context of the industry's overall transformation. We host conferences on a number of topics. In addition to precision medicine, we also have conferences that focus on investment, population health, digital health, and patient engagement. We also have several different programs. We have a column called MedCity Influencers, in which people can contribute articles. We also have a membership-based program called MedCitizens, which is geared for startups with editorial and event benefits. We also debuted a program recently called Spotlight, which uses video to tell the story of important companies, executives, and healthcare initiatives. And the inaugural Spotlight will focus on Cancer IQ, and it's available on our website. If you have any questions about any of these programs, you can contact me at sbaum@medcitynews.com. I'd like to also tell you a little bit about our podcast series. It's called MedCity Pivot. You can listen to all our episodes on our website. And if you have any questions about participating in MedCity Pivot, you can contact Arundhati Parmar, the editor-in-chief, at aparmar@medcitynews.com. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for this conference, Independence Blue Cross, which is the largest healthcare insurance organization in Southeast Pennsylvania, as well as JPOD at the University of Pennsylvania. I'd also like to thank our partners, University City Science Center, MHIN, Health Wildcatters, Startup Health, and Argo Pond Consulting. And that brings us to our panel, What It Takes to Build a Successful Regional Bioinnovation Hub with Venture Cafe. Our moderator for this panel is Michelle Histand, who's the Director of Innovation with Independence Blue Cross. Michelle uses design thinking to help solve challenging issues in healthcare and beyond. She loves drawing the creativity out of people and teaching them that even the most technical or data-driven people can be expansive thinkers. She's also an executive director of BPHL Innovation Festival. She has a tremendous amount of pride for her home city of brotherly and sisterly love, Philadelphia, and co-founded the festival in 2019 as a way to highlight innovation in the region and draw more attention to the city. Michelle also loves being an adjunct professor at Temple University, where she teaches topics on innovation and entrepreneurship. Next on the panel, we have Lisa Dalton, who's the Chief Population Officer for Spark Therapeutics. Lisa has more than 20 years of human resources experience across the biopharmaceutical and financial services industries. She's responsible for 4 core functions: HR, IT, corporate facilities, and corporate communications, focused on how to enable and empower Spark's most important resources, talented people. She's been instrumental in helping lead the company's growth from just a few dozen people to more than 500 people today. She began her tenure at Spark Therapeutics in July 2014 as head of human resources and joined the company's corporate management team as chief human resource officer in 2018. Lisa also serves as a member of the board of advisors of Life Science Cares Philadelphia. She holds an MBA from Rutgers University School of Business and a BA in psychology from Pennsylvania State University. Next on the panel, we have Audrey Greenberg, co-founder of the Discovery Labs, which is an advanced therapeutic CDMO services and real estate company based in the heart of the Silicon Valley, totaling 1.6 million square feet on 300 acres in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Audrey has more than 25 years of experience in venture capital, startups, strategic business management, and acquisitions. Before Discovery Lab, she served as an executive at CBRE Global Investors and Clarion Partners, managing collectively more than 100 billion in assets under management. She started her career working as an accountant at Deloitte and an investment banker at Morgan Stanley. She has an MBA from Wharton and is a CPA registered in Illinois. Last but not least, we have Tiffany Wilson, President and CEO of University City Science Center. Tiffany brings more than 18 years of leadership transitioning innovative medical technologies from benchtop to bedside building partnerships across academia, industry, and economic development organizations. She most recently served as CEO of Global Center for Medical Innovation. She joined GCMI in 2011 to lead its startup phase, establishing an overall vision, building strategic relationships, and bringing together key stakeholders of the medical device ecosystem. Tiffany served on the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship of the U.S. Department of Commerce. She was recognized by Inc. magazine as one of 17 inspiring women to watch in 2017, and one of Becker Hospital Review's 110 Women in MedTech to Know in 2017. Tiffany earned a BBA in International Business from Loyola University and an MBA from Georgetown University and McDonough School of Business. And now over to our panel.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everybody. We're so happy to have you all here and appreciate you spending a bit of your time today. So we're going to jump right in. Before we get into the panel, I'm just going to give everybody 2 minutes to talk a little bit more about their work and what they do. I know you just heard their bios. We would love to hear from everyone about what their function is. So I'll quickly say I'm Michelle Histand, and as Stephanie said, I head up the innovation work at Independence Blue Cross. So we're a health insurer located here in Philadelphia. And from an innovation perspective, we've had an innovation function for about 8 years now. And primarily it consists of thinking about how we do a better job of designing products, services, everything related to the healthcare kind of landscape and ecosystem and customer experience. So we do a lot of design work internally, and then we're also doing design out in the community with our partners and our customers to think about how we can change how things happen and work. So let me turn it over first to Lisa at Spark to tell us a little bit more.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, I'm Lisa Dalton, and as Stephanie mentioned, I am the Chief People Officer of Spark Therapeutics, and with that, I have the privilege of overseeing HR, IT, corporate communications, real estate, and facilities. And really, those are the organizations that shape our employee experience, which is really critical to the success that we're going to have. At Spark Therapeutics, we are based here in Philadelphia, and we successfully commercialized the first gene therapy for a genetic disease in both the US and Europe. We have our portfolio of gene therapies and is targeting genetic and other diseases in the retina, liver, and CNS. And as of last year, we became a member of the Roche group through an acquisition. And with that, we're looking forward to being able to scale more rapidly, globally, and really further our position as a worldwide leader in gene therapy.
Excellent, thanks. Let's turn it over to Audrey.
Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be here with everyone on this all-female panel. I love it. And I want to just talk a little bit about myself and the Discovery Labs. You mentioned that we're a 1.6 million square foot ecosystem in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, but there's a lot of interesting aspects to our business. We have 4 main components to our business. One is the CDMO that you mentioned, an advanced therapeutics CDMO that works with companies like Spark to manufacture and develop their therapies. It's really next generation therapies, including cell and gene therapy, which was really born here in Philadelphia. University of Pennsylvania and CHOP are on some of the pioneers in this area, and we're lucky to have that presence in Philadelphia. In addition to our CDMO, which is called the Center for Breakthrough Medicines, breakthroughmedicines.com, we also have our real estate business, where we have a life science cluster out in King of Prussia, where we, like I said, are on 300 acres. And what makes us unique is that we have ready to go lab space. We know that lab space is in short supply right now, with vacancy rates at all-time lows and rents at all-time highs. It's really hard to find lab space. It's also very hard to find GMP space. So having that offering, which is expensive to build, time-consuming to find, is really a unique offering here in Philadelphia. And then the third component to our business is Unite IQ, which is an incubator where we allow startup biotech companies to adhere to GMP grade materials and processes very early in their life cycle to speed that path to commercialization going forward. We also, interestingly, and maybe an important part recently of having a successful BioInnovation hub, have COVID-19 testing in Testing Centers of America. Look, we realize we have 1 million square feet of lab space. There's no better use right now than to put it to work for our community and the better health of society, and doing COVID-19 testing on a very large scale using PCR methodology, which detects COVID-19 before you're infectious, which is really the gold standard of all testing. My focus as an individual within Discovery Labs, I'm the co-founder, and I'm really focused on strategy, execution, team building, and really launching the business into the next stratosphere, and being an important part of the team. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say on the panel, and I guess I'm handing it over to Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me here. So as some of you know, I'm actually new to the Philadelphia region. So this will be an interesting discussion for me, and I look forward to learning really from all of you today. So I joined the Science Center as president and CEO on October 1st. Many of you know the Science Center has been around since 1963. It was really established by a group of leading academic and research institutions in the region to serve as a neutral place for researchers and entrepreneurs to convene, collaborate, and make advances in science and technology. We've been at the forefront of the innovation economy ever since, really bringing together the academia, the industry, the capital, and as the needs of the community has really evolved over the last 60 years, so too have our offerings. Our objective at the Science Center has really remained constant, however, and that's really, how do we help bright ideas become businesses and nurture a STEM workforce to support the 21st century economy, all while serving as a catalyst for economic growth for the region. And we really do that in 3 ways. First, we're identifying, supporting, and commercializing promising technology. We've got a network of 40 academic and research institutions across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. We're creating spaces and programming to really facilitate people convening, mostly virtually in 2020, as we are today, but really in person in off-pandemic years. And then we've really been working to fill the talent pipeline by introducing students and adults to the power and the potential of careers in STEM through both hands-on training and project-based learning. And finally, really with our development partner at the Science Center, Wexford Science and Technology, we're building an innovation hub at UCity Square, which boasts over 3 million square feet of office and lab space, resident, retail, and at this point, it's home to over 200 companies and employing 10,000 people. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Tiffany. We're happy to have you all. So let's jump into questions. We have not that much time together, and I feel like you all have a lot to say and to offer. So Lisa, I'm going to start with you because Spark has been around for quite some time now. So I think you would have a great perspective on some history here. Can you tell us about some of the milestones in Philadelphia's evolution as
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. And it's, in some ways, it's almost funny to hear that we're sort of the tenured ones because Spark was a spin out in 2013. But when we think about the greater Philadelphia region, it's the original home to cell and gene therapy. It's where the field started more than 2 decades ago. So it's where it was nurtured. It's where it continues, and it's where it's rapidly growing. So that is kind of the starting point, if you will. As I said, in 2013, Spark was a spinout of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. For us, then some of the key milestones were in December of 2017. So just a few years later, we got the first FDA-approved gene therapy product for a genetic disease in the U.S., being Luxturna, for a rare form of blindness. And then in December 2019, we had, Roche decided to come in and get into gene therapy. And the way that they did that was they came and they acquired Spark, and we continued to operate as an autonomous affiliate of the Roche group. But with that, and over that course of time, we've invested millions of dollars here in Philadelphia, and we're really proud to call the city our home. We were founded here and we continue to have ambitious growth plans. And when I say that, again, being a startup not so long ago, in 2013, to give you context, we were 5 employees. Today, we're actually nearing 600 that we're going to close out the year. When we moved into our space at 3737 Market, we had a footprint of 28,000 square feet. Our lab space, where we did research, tech dev, and manufacturing, was just roughly 14,000. Today, we're managing a portfolio of over 500,000 square feet, and we're continuing to grow. We would expect, in the years to come, both the number of our employees and that square footage could double. So really exciting. I think the other piece for Philadelphia in that, when we think about it, is, that what our kind of good fortunate success has brought, it's a catalyst for the others, for the entrepreneurs. It's starting to ground Philadelphia as that Silicon Valley. And you think about, Penn has had more spin-outs. It's, we've seen Community become one of our neighbors back in 2015, Passage Bio 2019, and other biotechs are coming into the area. You have Amicus here. They announced their collaboration with Penn. You've got Verve Therapeutics. And we also are continuing to see the investment, both, whether that's through venture capital or from big pharmas, which is really exciting. So that influx of just the cell and gene therapy companies in this area, today we're looking at overall more than 30 cell and gene therapy companies here in Philadelphia. And when you think about our industry, we've got 87% of pharmaceutical or biotech having some presence then in the greater Philadelphia region. So it's a very exciting kind of just, we're young in this field, but there's a lot more to come.
That's amazing. Your growth has been phenomenal. 500 to 600 employees is pretty impressive. You talk about all the companies coming in and the entrepreneurship that's happening. And Tiffany, I think the Science Center has really established itself as a place for entrepreneurs to gather and have conversations and to meet and collaborate. And you're in University City, so Lisa mentioned they started at 3737 Market, and you're right there. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why location is important to your mission. You mentioned it when you talked about all of the academics in the region and everything else, but talk a little bit more about the location of the Science Center and how that helps foster your mission and foster inclusive innovation.
Yeah, I think that what's really fascinating to me, and particularly coming from outside the market, is just the density, where you've got the clinicians, engineers, investors, business people, the ability to walk and meet. The Science Center offers an amazing space to sit down and have those conversations. The work that we do in life sciences in general is so multidisciplinary, and that journey from an idea to that first patient to the bedside requires, careful collaboration, and putting together that puzzle between the clinician, the regulators, the business people. And, it's funny in this COVID time to be able to do this so virtually. Is so challenging. And I think it highlights the importance of the human interaction as part of all this. The ability to, sit in the quorum space at the Science Center and see someone walk by who you may have just been talking about, who would be so critical to that discussion, where you can invite someone in. We can't do that over Zoom, right? And so the ability to walk down the street to a lab, or to meet with a clinician in the healthcare setting, to really see and understand those unmet clinical needs, it's just a gem of a place to be, that I just don't see without having to get in a car and park and walk. I think there's a beauty in being able to interact that closely.
I miss being there. I would much rather be at the Science Center right now than at my dining room table. There is definitely magic in being together and having those organic interactions that you talked about, right?
There is passionate, as I kind of walk into the office when I'm, I haven't quite fully transitioned to Philadelphia yet, but walk in there with my mask and see the lonely quorum sitting there, maybe some people sitting there in an empty coffee shop, but I can see, and even prior to when I would come up to visit as part of Launch Lane, to see that energy there and the vibrancy of all of the different, the diversity of people.
Yeah.
In that density is really compelling. It's exciting.
Yeah, well, and you're right. Over Zoom, you don't get that same energy of feeding off and building ideas. And we're doing it. We're making it work, and it's happening. And there are some great things to come out of remote collaboration, I'm sure. But there's nothing that replaces being together and feeling the energy. So you're going to be really stoked when you come in and it's full again, because it's an amazing place to be.
I think there's so much energy. There's so much opportunity ahead of us. I mean, it's a blessing to be in this industry sector right now. And, as I look forward into the recovery and, re-energized around telemedicine and digital health solutions, and we've got real world evidence now of how we can make an impact. So it's really the light is at the end of the tunnel when we can all come together and start solving some of these problems together.
It will be very exciting. Yeah, I agree. Audrey, you talked about space in your introduction. You talked about how important space is and the kind of space that you have at Discovery Labs. And as we think about, space where people come together, I wonder if you could talk about what elements you think are important to build and create a next gen kind of hub, and what you see as, kind of potential disruptors on the horizon when you look at that.
Definitely. And in addition to spontaneous interaction that Tiffany talked about that occurs in these clusters, one of the things that is on the forefront of every single innovator company's mind really is speed to market and speed to milestone. So we need a community that really supports that. And when you're looking at these next generation therapies, we're really focused on not only speed, but efficacy and quality, and to have all of the assay development, the forward-looking commercial manufacturing in terms of optimization and process intensification, having all of that in one location is very beneficial. One thing that we have, or several things I should say, at Discovery Labs that helps as well and has been exacerbated in the pandemic is supply chain management. So the fact that we're having a tremendous amount of onshoring due to disruptions in the supply chain from COVID, and that was really going on before COVID, and the complete inability to actually procure not only some of these bioreactors that are in short supply, but the consumables and the single-use supplies that go in the bioreactors, by having one source for process development, supplies, consumables, equipment, manufacturing, incubator space, all in one place is really important for an innovation hub. But let me just say, Philadelphia has done a tremendous job. If you look at our track record over the last 10 years of going from, not only like number 10 or 11 or 12 in terms of the clusters, but now number 5 in some surveys, and even in the top 5 has been incredible. And it really can be attributed to many things, one of which obviously is our incredible research institutions, which I mentioned earlier, and the amazing amount of NIH funding. I saw in the chat somebody asked about, private equity in the area. We can import that. There was a response in the chat, but also there's NIH funding, which goes a long way. And I think we're 4th in terms of eds and meds and life science funding. Second is our hospital and our healthcare systems. We have some of the best healthcare systems in the world. Training and education is incredibly important. We have to train people, and I'm sure Lisa deals with this every day as a chief people officer and trying to recruit just like we're doing. It's very hard to find some talent in some of these. We have actually been having an easy time because, it's a startup, it's exciting. I'm sure Lisa experiences that too, but it's hard to find people with expertise, not only in GMP manufacturing, but also in cell and gene therapy. So training that next generation of talent and having that in Philadelphia is going to be important. But we have a surplus of life science employees up to 70,000. So that's been an important part of our growth. And then proximity, little silly things like I'm sure you've all been watching on the nightly news, but supply chain and cold storage, proximity to an international airport. You probably see this on the news last night with how they're getting the vaccines around, being part of a critical supply chain with access to, like I said, the international airport, highways, thoroughfares. We're on the Eastern Seaboard and the Excella line. It's just very accessible, Philadelphia. So it's a combination of the people, the academic institutions, the research institutions, our training institutes, and having that NIH funding coupled with the ability to stay here and manufacture here will really change the future for us. And I think in terms of disruptors in the space, look, if we're thinking about scaling up instead of scaling out manufacturing and not having bioreactor farms, but rather doing 2,000 liters and up in some of these viral vector manufacturing plants, we're going to need some interesting and groundbreaking technological innovation. And so having that in terms of disruption as a potential, I wouldn't say threat, but it can enhance our process is important to keep on the cutting edge in terms of technology. Also, CRISPR is obviously come to the forefront lately as well. So developing and enabling these life-saving therapies, having the manufacturing space to actually produce them is all going to be an important part of the ecosystem going forward.
Thank you. I love that. And Lisa, I wonder if you want to comment on the training and development piece and the people piece. I know that's your expertise. I also just wonder if there are other factors that you've seen come together to really help boost Philadelphia's profile. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the city, right? I'm our biggest supporter. I think that we have everything that you need. Audrey hit on a lot of those things, but I wonder if you could comment on that and what else you've seen.
Yeah, I will say, when I look back 6 years ago and I started the growth of Spark and started thinking about how we were going to recruit, it was a little bit of, kind of crossing our fingers that if we built it, the talent would come. Because as Audrey was saying, we started building out our manufacturing and our QC teams, and you didn't have gene therapy expertise out there in the industry. So we had to figure out, where could we source the talent? And with that, how did we get them to come into the city? Because they weren't here in the city at the time. They were in the suburbs, they were in Boston, they were in San Francisco, and so you had to sell Philadelphia. And I think when we think about what boosts that profile, building on where Audrey was kind of starting with, you have thankfully that strong academic hospital systems. You have the combination of institutes like Children's Hospital Philadelphia, UPenn, making these investments, not only of money, but also of talent, that we were able to pull from, which was great. I think at the same time, when we look at this hub and people, for pioneers in cell and gene therapy, you had to give people a reason to join, but that reason to join was, in a sense, a lot easier because so many people, if they're in the biotech or pharmaceutical industry, they're here to make an impact on the patients. They're here to make a difference in science. That's what, now there's no more exciting place to be. And coming out of those big industries or those big institutions and being one of, few that eventually gets to one of many, but you have such a chance to really get back to the importance of bringing more medicine and treatments to patients and seeing how your role, not only if you're a scientist, not only if you're, a researcher or a manufacturer, but I would say, all of our employees have that line of sight. That's really something that's attractive. I think too, the location, again, Audrey was alluding to this as well. For us, anchoring ourselves in University City, that made it easier to get people in. They can take rail, they can commute in, it's access to the airports. It's something that I hope the city continues to invest in, but it is, it made it easy for people to come in because at least for our employees going back 6 years ago, they were unfamiliar for commuting into the city. That was a daunting task to them. That was something, they were used to suburban campuses. So that's been something that I do think the cluster that is forming around us and that University City is starting to really offer is kind of fueling that next generation of medicines. And that's really critical. I think, the other piece for us is that we get to sit in a city center where, we're direct neighbors of Drexel. We're actually sharing that their students are in our buildings, or we're maybe in their buildings at times. So we have that sense of community. And I think just that great respect for the talent and and also the diversity of the talent that just exists, both from academia and from industry that are coming into this area. So that to me is what is boosting Philadelphia.
Great point.
That's great. There was an audience question, Lisa, about how, and I think you answered it a little bit. I just want to see if you want to add anything. An audience question about how you attracted talent to Spark before you had FDA approval, and if that changed after the fact. So you talked about kind of early recruiting, but I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, it has changed over the years, kind of the profile of maybe people's risk taking. But one of the things that we were fortunate, and if you thought about it, was we were one of the first startups. We were one of the, kind of first ones in Philadelphia to give people that opportunity that, San Francisco, Southern California, Boston, they offered that. And all of a sudden Spark had that to offer. We were also fortunate. We had, members of our leadership team that were very renowned in their space. So people wanted to follow the science. They wanted to follow the leaders. We were able to attract early days for that pre-IPO, for that excitement of getting to experience that, which you didn't get to do so much in Philadelphia, to then that growth trajectory, then being able to come in and be a part of the first getting approval. And, so many people, they got to be part of history of, that's a once in a lifetime chance in your career. I think now we have another profile because now we have the stability of Roche. So we've been fortunate along the way to have very different profiles of who we could attract and continue that growth. As far as the training, I think it really challenged leaders to think beyond their typical profiles and kind of break their biases and really start to think about capabilities and skill sets. And one of the things that we have always been very passionate about is that diversity, because that's what is going to drive innovation. So we were an organization that was forming out of the complementary, kind of skill sets of academia and industry. We had to build, the best of that and appreciate what each other was bringing in order to kind of, and you see it behind me, we were creating the path. There's no playbook to what we've been doing. So you had to have people that were willing to jump in and just run with you and give them that compelling story. Our mission and again, that what we can do for patients, we're very fortunate that kind of that's the easy sell. And then it's really, giving people kind of that vision to our culture and to the growth that we're going to see.
Yeah, I love that. Tiffany, you mentioned that you're new to Philly, and I wonder if you have a different perspective on all of this and what you're thinking as we continue to court you as your new city, what you're thinking about, and what's your perspective on what we have to offer as a region, and what have you seen so far?
So what I'm excited, kind of building on Lisa's comments, what I have been hearing over the last 3-5 years, and I think Philadelphia is very well positioned for it, is it has become too expensive to do early stage development work in Boston and San Francisco, right? And so from my background, I think in terms of due diligence checklists and burn rate, right? And you want to preserve that early capital as much as you can. And so I've had conversations with investors and talent on the West Coast and Northeast who are open now in a way that they haven't been before to relocate and either build their companies or join companies in the other cities, the flyover cities, if you will. And I think the beauty of Philadelphia and what I'm really learning and seeing, we mentioned the density of the meds and eds. We mentioned the talent there. Audrey, you mentioned the ability to scale quickly, in the region, and all of the pieces are there. It's just making sure that we optimize the connection of the dots. And so, as I look forward to see an ecosystem with such rich infrastructure and research in the proximity to New York, and Boston, right? It's into Washington. You know, it's easy to hop on the train and go visit FDA. It's easy to go meet with investors in New York. You know, I think the biggest thing that the next elements of those of this equation that we need is more corporate engagement. You know, I'd like to see more corporate engagement, not only in the region, but in the city, right? Who are the players that are going to invest in and acquire these technologies and help them scale and grow? Because I think if we've got that, that becomes even more attractive for talent outside the region to say, hey, if I come and join this startup, or if I build my company there and try and recruit into the area, and if things don't work out, there's somewhere else to go. So really having that continuum of corporate activity. And I think the second piece of that equation is really thinking about capital and how do we begin to or continue to increase. You know, I'm seeing little shimmers of light here and there, but how do we create a robust capital continuum to help these companies, you know, not only on the NIH level and on the private equity side, but creating that relay race from non-dilutive funding to the equity chain.
We have a lot of questions coming in from the audience, and we'll get to those in just one second. Audrey, before we do, I don't know if you had an additional perspective, you know, in terms of what else we need to enhance in the region. We have a lot of great things going, and Tiffany, there was a great transition to what else we could be working on. So corporate engagement, capital. Audrey, anything else you would add to that?
I think I love the comment, robust capital continuum. That's a great one. I'm stealing that. But in addition to that, I do think expanding the funnel, right? The more therapies and companies that you have at the startup phase creates more success on the other end, which creates more growth for our cluster. I mean, Spark is a great example of that in terms of a homegrown success story. And we need more homegrown success stories. And the way we do that is by expanding the funnel, having more startups, which means more funding, which means also, by the way, lab space. We need space for people to be. And I don't know if everybody saw the article this week in Philly Mag, but it was talking about all the lab space that's going to be coming online, which is critical for our region. So I think that's a first step. Also, you got to have manufacturing capacity. Why should a company that's born here have to go to another state to manufacture? It's silly. We need more manufacturing here. We need small scale and large scale manufacturing, 3,000 square foot suites and larger. So ability to get one batch at a time for pre-clin and clin, and then obviously large scale manufacturing at the other end of the range. And then lastly, I'll say, and this is less sort of biotechy, but maintaining our position still is amazing. We're the birthplace of our country. I mean, to have the culture, the restaurants, the history, the museums, just the incredible overall ecosystem we have from a lifestyle perspective with a relatively, candidly, I've lived in a lot of cities, New York, Los Angeles, all over the country. The cost of living here is great. And so, and the public school systems are incredible. So having that, in terms of a lifestyle choice for employees and attracting talent to the region, retaining talent in the region, attracting companies, I will say, get negative for a minute. Sorry to do that. But one thing we could do, and I appeal to our government, is to provide more public funding and incentives for companies to do business here. We're competing with other regions, which I will not mention. From a global perspective, we're courting international companies every day to set up operations at our site at the Discovery Labs. And sometimes we may lose business to other states because we don't get the incentives that other states are providing. So I appeal to our state representatives and our governor and everyone else that can help us in terms of getting more funding, public funding for these companies that are looking to establish operations here.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. that was a good impassioned plea. I like it. So let's dig into audience questions. We have about 12 minutes left together. And we have a number of questions here. So one is around how we compare. How does our BioInnovation Hub compare to hotbeds in California and Boston? And what can our strategy be to move up from the number 5 spot? And Audrey, I think some of the things you just touched on, kind of start to go in that direction. So I'll give this question to anyone who wants to jump in.
Well, I think we talked about it. Tiffany, go ahead. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
No, I mean, you said something that I thought was really compelling, Audrey, around the funnel, right? And increasing the funnel. And one of the things that I've been, thinking about this year and as I get to know the ecosystem and just given my background. And so when I come in, I see a lot of discussion and talent and IP around digital health, right? Capacity around digital health and AI, and then cell and gene therapy. And so I think in terms of the capital continuum associated with that, the commercialization continuum, and the exits that happen, right? The amount of capital that you need to get a digital health company to exit versus a cell and gene therapy to exit, right? And kind of in the middle there is med tech. And so as I've been coming up to speed and on my listening tour, so to speak, and learning, meeting all these different shareholders and players in the market, there's a robust med tech sector in the Philadelphia region. It seems to be spread out. And so, I'm looking forward to using the power of the Science Center to convene a lot of these expertise, a lot of the companies, and really hear where the gaps are. Because I think if we can layer that activity into the mix to create that funnel, we've got a funnel of exits of different technologies, right? And oh, by the way, over the last 10 years, a lot of these technologies have been converging anyway, right? So 10 years ago, you started to see the convergence. Everyone was coming and say, I want to make this medical device, but I want to put some sensors on it and capture data. And I don't know what I want to capture, or how I'm going to monetize it, but it's the cool thing to do, right? And so now we know that there's so much more advancement in machine learning and AI. And oh, by the way, COVID this year gave us the blessing of telemedicine. And finally, right, we've got to figure out reimbursement models and the delivery models for that. So I think it's positioned really well. On the other side, when I'm thinking about cell and gene therapy, and this is I started my career in med tech on the scaffold side of regenerative medicine. Cell and gene therapy were like way out there. And here we are today. But thinking about the ancillary type, delivery systems, diagnostic tools, all of the things kind of around cell and gene therapy that make the actual therapies more robust. And so I think that's where we've really got an opportunity to broaden that funnel, Audrey, as you mentioned, and bring the capital to play to create a more robust ecosystem.
Thank you. I want to go back to the people for a minute. There were a couple of questions around talent and people. So maybe Lisa, I'll toss this to you to start. So there are two different questions, but I think they can actually go together pretty nicely. So there was a question around if there are skill gaps in education and training in Philadelphia for talent. And then another question that I think might end up being a related one is, how has recruiting changed in COVID, right? Does attracting talent to Philly companies, has that changed because of COVID? And there might be an answer that suits both.
Yeah, so I would say that the training and I'm actually, you saw as an advisory member with Drexel, we have many of our leaders connected to the academic institutes that are our neighbors, thinking about, how do we start that training now? How do we think about the curriculums, and how do we start influencing that? Because what we're learning different than, because of how scientific and still how nascent our when you go from research to development to manufacturing and on to commercialization, it's not the same training ground that we had in other, the small molecule biotechs that many of us had come from. So it's, again, really helping people understand the science, the nature of the science, and how important the science is to the roles across that development cycle. So I think it was really just how we targeted really our roles, that, it's not just a manufacturing technician, this is a scientific role, and we had to back it up with the pay and the rewards and the incentives that we brought people in with. So I do think there were some things we had to think about early on of just what is out there and how do you bring it in, and how can, that balance of, we had the experts in gene therapy coming out of academia, how were they there to teach some of the science, but then being able to then leverage the backgrounds that people had coming in. I think, looking at the virtual nature of this, so we mentioned we're nearing 600 employees. I think we had over 200 join us this year. About 170 of those came in since March 2nd. So we've had to completely change how we recruit. And Michelle, we were talking about this before we got started, where we pivoted on a dime. All of a sudden we went virtual. We were not a company that was used to working virtual. We were not the best in technology and whatnot, but we were able to do that. And I think one of the pieces that we leveraged throughout was continuing to make sure that our culture came through, because that is so important, that when people join Spark, they are going to fit in with the fabric of our culture and our values and really thrive. And, and to me, when we think about that as well, and it did open this up, was, we all of a sudden were able to reach a more diverse workforce. And whether that was from location or, again, the profile of our organization, but and I think 2020 is really kind of hammering this home. We have to continue to look at how we not only attract a diverse workforce, but we're giving people those equitable opportunities, and we're creating a culture of inclusion. That's been very important as we tell our story to candidates and have been able to really grow during this time frame. So we've been very thankful to our, that we've been able to have such a great growth story, even in the face of COVID. It's a silver lining for us in this year, but and something that we're going to continue nurturing and fostering as we can continue on, because the growth plans are big.
Thanks. So we have, let's see, we have about 6 minutes left. So I think some of these questions y'all have touched on already. Somebody asked about the role that city and state plays. And, I think you talked about that. Audrey, you talked about, needing to be more accommodating and more friendly to businesses wanting to set up. I don't know if there's anything else to say about that. Maybe we'll end on this one. What kind of partnerships and collaboration are we inviting? And maybe as a second part of that question, how do we integrate tech companies with health and life science companies?
Yeah, that's a great question about tech and life science. I think there's an important collaboration between academia and innovator companies. A lot of the technologies is being invented right now in academic labs. So if you can have a collaboration with an academic institution and a CDMO or an innovator company, that seems to be the most common thing that's going on right now. But I love what you're saying about, you're increasingly seeing, by the way, in these ecosystems and these life science clusters, innovation hubs, Google, Microsoft, having a very strong presence because of the AI and because of the need for data and data management and data mining. In addition, on the patient side, which, look, we're all here because of the patient. It's all about saving lives and treating people. And the hard part about that right now is in clinical trials, actually finding the candidates. And there's candidates out there. So what's the problem? There's got to be an interface that matches patients with the cures. And I think that's going to be a critical ingredient. And by the way, that's all technology that's doing that. So.
Yeah, from my perspective, I see a big opportunity to bring cybersecurity, cyber tech, and life sciences together. To your point, Audrey, around patient data and the vulnerabilities there. We know that health tech security is an issue, and kind of mentioned before the convergence of digital health and medical devices. 10 years ago, I was bringing people into the room who were all engineers, but they hadn't really worked together before because their disciplines never came together like this. And so I think there's a lot of value in bringing together people with cybersecurity expertise and healthcare expertise and comparing notes there. We know a lot more around the policies around cybersecurity now and some of the federal regulations there. So I think the Philadelphia region is uniquely poised to tackle some of those challenges.
Thanks, Tiffany. So in our last 3 minutes, can you each leave us with what you think the most interesting trend for 2021 is in like one sentence, or maybe what you're most looking forward to for 2021, besides 2020 being over, which we're all looking forward to? I'll start. I'll go to Lisa for this one, and then we'll pass it down the line.
Great. So for me, I think it's a clear opportunity to shore up and invest in the infrastructure. We've talked about that, and I think let's continue to leverage what makes Philadelphia great. Audrey was mentioning quite a few of those, whether it's the arts, the culture, the diversity, the restaurants, and really hoping that the recovery comes in 2021. So our small businesses, our restaurants, all of them come back, they can flourish and continue to build that ecosystem.
Audrey?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. It's hard to ignore COVID when you're talking about trends in next year, right? So we got to come out of the pandemic. But I think outside of that, and a tangential effect of the pandemic has been what I talked about earlier, is these supply chain disruptions. And I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of onshoring occurring, which is starting to already. There were so many issues with just getting masks and now vials and all of the critical components that are manufactured overseas. And our relations with China have not helped with that. So onshoring all the critical components, raw materials, supplies, consumables, and candidly, just critical ingredients is going to be important. And then continuing that the initiative of training, people-focused, diversity. We're a minority majority city in Philadelphia. And that is a benefit to us, and we have to use it.
Tiffany, anything to add there? Trend for 2021?
In digital health advancements to address in the short term both economic and healthcare disparities in our country and in our.
Well said.
That's a most important and great place to stop. Thank you all so much. It was so lovely to talk to you, especially when it's three amazing women doing amazing things. So lovely to have the conversation with all of you. I'm going to turn it back over to Gary from the Science Center, and he can tell you all about some upcoming sessions.